Hi, and welcome back to Family Sociology. If you remember, just last week, in Chapter 1 was where we considered what is family, legal, personal, social, and intentional. We reviewed a varied theories, to explain the role of family to its members and to society at large. And then lastly, we considered the science of family sociology, the research methods. In this chapter, we are presented with an area critical to any study of family. Canadian families have changed over time, albeit slowly but changed, and will continue to change. And this is because family, like all social institutions, is influenced by the larger social context. By discussing differences head-on, we can help counteract the notion that one family configuration is best. The ever-changing mosaic that has defined Canadian society has also defined what is seen as normal family. So, many social policies reflect this image and may have a negative impact on families that don't meet this particular standard. In fact, almost all of us belong to a minority group in some sense, whether that's through our ethnicity, our religious persuasion, our family composition, or some other differences. Sensitivity to diversity is important both as we live in our own families and as we work with other people and their families. In many ways, we're more alike than we are different, and I'm going to say several statements that I'd like you to consider how and if it applies to you. Now, you can make notes of the statements that apply to you. And now here I go. You own a pet. You can just go yes or no, or pet yes. You speak at least 3 languages. You play a sport or at least once a week. So you play a sport at least once a week. You have a tattoo or a piercing. You have a brother or a sister. You have a stepbrother or stepsister. How about you've been to Disney World? How about you eat rice at least once a week? Blue is your favorite color. You like hip-hop and rap. You like classic rock. You celebrate Easter. You have read the Quran. You live with both your parents. You see a grandmother, you see a grandparent at least once a month. You have a part-time job. You are a visible minority. Your parents are immigrants. You love math. I know that one doesn't always apply, but I live with a person where that's definitely, they love math. Now that we have completed the list and you have jotted down some statements that apply to you, in what ways do you think other people are similar, and in what ways might they be different from you? Chances are not everyone selected the same statements or even had a great deal of overlap. Everyone is different, yet we can still all get along in spite of these differences. Think about your own family. What is your ethnic and cultural background? In what ways would you say that your family is similar or different from most Canadian families? Now, there are 2 terms that we're going to begin with. And they're ones which you've no doubt heard of, and that is race and ethnicity. But we're going to make sure we're clear about what makes them the same or different. Race is a system of classifying people based on physical characteristics such as skin color. Ethnicity is the term used to specify a group of people who share a common cultural heritage. Now, while cultures are more real than races, classification by ethnicity is still a complex undertaking, especially in multicultural societies like Canada. Interpreting census data on ethnicity is challenging because, one, concepts of ethnicity are fluid. They're not static. They move and change over time. Two, respondents' understanding of their ethnicity, generational cohort, length of time since immigration, and social context at the time of data collection can all affect reporting from one census to another. 3. Increasing intermarriages among various groups increases the reporting of multiple ancestries. And then 4, changes in format of the census questions affect census results. So for example, on that last one, the census form, the inclusion of Canadian as an ethnic choice has led to an increase in this category, as you would expect. In 1996, that census year, for the first time, people were asked whether they were a member of one of the population groups defined as a visible minority, a person other than Indigenous who is non-Caucasian in race and non-white in color, for example, Chinese, South Asian, Black, Arab, West Asian, Filipino, could fall within that. And just as we have seen with the definition of the term family in Chapter 1, there are many different ways to describe groups of people. Legal definitions may differ from social definitions. Individuals may own personal definitions for their race and ethnic identity. And in addition, 2 more terms that sociologists add to better understand the complex relationships between various groups. And the 2 terms are dominant and minority groups. And it's not as clear-cut as you might think. A minority group refers to any group that holds less power than the dominant group, a group that has greater power but not necessarily the greatest numbers. Okay? So 2 more terms that we're going to consider when we dialogue about diversity, and that is prejudice and discrimination. And again, often they're misunderstood, so let's be clear about their definitions. Prejudice is the negative attitude toward an entire group of people. Now, this is generally our thoughts and thinking rather than any direct actions that we may take. Prejudice can lead to actions toward a group of people. Discrimination is the unfair treatment, there are the actions, of people based on their social characteristics rather than on merit. This can occur at both the individual basis and at the institutional level. Now, you might not know some of these terms, but in your textbook, direct discrimination. If I was a majority member, as a majority member, I was to deny renting my apartment that I have to a family of a visible minority group. That would be direct discrimination. Indirect discrimination involves social policies and practices that are applied unevenly to different groups. Tuition at post-secondary. The domestic student pays one price, the international student pays a different price. Now, these are affected by there being a white middle-class norm and reflects the values of a Canadian, British, and Christian heritage. Okay, if we move from that to stereotype, and this is where prejudice and discrimination can move towards stereotyping or an oversimplified perception people have of an entire group. All people of this color. It's not different than to say all white people. We're no more the same as any other racial group. There is too much variability within groups for us to reliably apply stereotypes. So when someone or family moves to Canada from another country, they are termed an immigrant. Once here, some may lack the financial resources, whether that's their own money to spend to look after themselves or a job. They may lack some social resources. This would be the personal and professional networking that, as a result of living in a particular culture, you gain over time. And cognitive resources, the knowledge of language and cultural norms. Still, much of their disadvantage is based on their minority status. Now, there are 4 main responses to minority status, which are called Culturalization Strategies. These are psychological and behavioral changes in individuals as a result of migration. And we're going to look at these individually, but there's integration, assimilation, separation, and marginalization. Culturalization strategies located along 2 dimensions of acceptance to rejections and from old to new culture. You'll see on page 33, figure 2.1, a graphic that represents this. And we're going to start with integration. Integration is when high levels of engagement in both the heritage and mainstream cultures are sought. Most adaptive pathways because it's the most adaptive pathway because it implies bicultural competence and flexibility. I have a friend who's from Italy, and when he moved from Italy to Canada in 1968, he did eventually do what a lot of people in the integrated component is they hyphenated their cultural background to Italian Canadian as an example of he's embracing both cultures and is integrated into the Canadian as well as his Italian background. Assimilation being the second one, it's based on rejection of one's heritage culture, and it may be voluntary or forced. Now, if within this it's a form of passing or trying to hide membership in a minority group. Example, immigrants from India who may opt to choose their own marriage partners instead of agreeing to arranged marriages. And that would be considered assimilation here in Canada. Then the third group would be that of separation. The strategy is based on voluntary rejecting of the dominant culture or involuntary exclusion from the dominant culture. Collective versus individual strategies can occur by choice or be forced on a particular group. And then the fourth group, the fourth part is what's known as marginalization. When little possibility or interest in maintaining heritage culture and little interest in having relations with others in the dominant culture. It's often associated with appearance of dysfunctional and deviant behaviors. For example, delinquency and substance abuse and family abuse. Now, aculturalization policies and strategies for integrating or excluding immigrants that are promoted or enforced by the dominant group through laws and other official programs. Now, these policies include multiculturalism, which is a Canadian experience, the melting pot, which is more of a US-based experience, segregation, and exclusion. So for clarity, multiculturalism is a policy that accepts diversity and includes all ethnic and cultural groups. This was done back in I believe it was the 70s. I'm going on my memory, and I'm sorry I don't remember. It was with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, where the multiculturalism came in. The melting pot is the policy that encourages individuals to assimilate into the dominant culture. You're no longer from your other culture. You are now, in the case of melting pot of the U.S., you are now a U.S. citizen, and you are that is who you are. Segregation, these policies are based on forced separation from the dominant group. We see this with indigenous reserves that fits within that particular group. And then we have exclusionary policies, and these policies that are marginalized immigrants. Historically, this includes South African policies to exclude blacks and other colored groups from holding or from many social activities. So this is basically a quick summary of the first part of this chapter, and in part 2, we're going to review the Canadian population, its makeup, and history. So we'll see you in part 2. Bye now.